person subject to any internal revenue tax shall at the point of each sale. Ano to? Valued at 500 pesos or more, issue duly registered sale or commercial invoices where the name, TIN, date of transaction, quantity, unit cost, and description of merchandise or nature of service will have to be indicated. Okay, ito po yung nabago. Dating 100, 500 pesos na po. Tumaas. Okay. Ayan, sinabi ko na. Yan, dito na tayo sa regulations. Ano yung dinagdag natin dito? So, in English lang po, nilakihan, nilawakan yung statement, but it barely says, all persons subject to an internal revenue tax shall at the point of each sale and transfer of merchandise for services rendered valued at 500 pesos or more issue duly registered invoices. In other words, kada benta, invoice lang po ang i-issue, wala na iba. Okay? And ang requirement ay 500 pesos or more. Now, the 500 pesos amount shall be adjusted to its present value every 3 years using the Consumer Price Index published by PSA. That's strictly speaking. But, meron po tayong mga dagdag. Provided further that the seller shall issue sale or commercial invoices when the buyer so requires, regardless of amount of transaction. Okay, ito yung mas pinakatabihin eh. Kaya hindi binibigyan ng invoice. Ang sabi dito, humingi o hindi, regardless of amount daw, bibigyan. Mag-i-issue po tayo. Okay? Kapag humingi ang buyer, kahit piso lang ang binili, hindi 500, i-issuean mo ng invoice. Okay? Next, provided, however, if the sales amount per transaction is below the threshold, which is 500 per transaction, okay? Anong gagawin? Seller will issue one invoice for the aggregate sales amount for such sale at the end of the day. Okay? So, diba usually yan, mga maliliit, sulat lang ng sulat sa notebook, kapirasong papel, kung magkano yung binibenta per transaction. Now, kung below 500 each transaction, hindi po minanday, not unless humingi yung buyer. Now, if that's the case, at the end of the day, ito total po lahat yung below 500 na transactions. At i-issuehan ng isang invoice. Total, aggregate na po yan. Okay? Siyempre, may mga detalyeng ilalagay sa invoice. Ano ang ilalagay? Abangan nyo po ang susunod na kabanata. Sa RMC na po natin yan ilalabas. Okay? Next. The aggregate sales amount at the end of the day is at least 500 pesos, provided finally that the VAT registered person shall issue duly registered sale or commercial invoices regardless of amount of sale and transfer. Sige, kanina, sabi niya, 500 pesos and up. So, regardless of amount, kung yung buyer humingi. Okay. Tapos, at the end of the day, kung below, maliliit na amount, at the end of the day, itotal mo, issuehan mo ng isang invoice. So, kung VAT registered, okay, ang seller, VAT registered ang buyer, regardless of amount. Mag-i-issue na invoice. Okay, so yan yung 4 po na scenarios on the issuance of invoices. Okay. Let's go to the revenue regulation. Basically, link up lang din po natin kung ano yung nandun sa batas, no? Pero in English lang po ng konti. The seller shall issue invoice when the buyer so requires, regardless of the amount of transaction. Provided, however, that if the sales amount per transaction is below the threshold, but the aggregate sales amount at the end of the day is 500 pesos, at least 500 pesos, the seller will issue one invoice for the aggregate sales amount for the day. And finally, VAT registered person, seller, and buyer, regardless of amount, should issue an invoice. So yan din po, binago na lang, no? Yung restate lang siya. Now, the word sales invoice shall be printed on the face. Ito pong provision na to, nung binabasa ko siya, medyo meron akong konting kailangang baguhin sa pagkaka-English. But just the same, ipapakita ko na lang din po sa inyo. Okay? The word sales invoice shall be printed on the face of the invoice to be issued to buyers or customers. The term cash sales invoice or charge invoice at the seller's option can be both printed in sales invoice as checkboxes or option for type of payment between the seller and buyer and or a separate series for cash sales and change. Okay. Para po, hindi masyadong mahaba, ganito lang ang kwento niya. Yan pong inyong sales invoice. Okay? Sabi natin, generic yung word na sales invoice. Diba? Pwedeng
Sige po.
gamitin siya for cash sales, pwede siyang credit sales. So, yung sales invoice, pwede pong lagyan mo lang siya doon ng box, cash sales, o kaya box, credit sales, just so you will know the nature of the sales transaction, kung cash ba to or credit. Okay, that's one. The other is, pwede kasi na instead of sales invoice, ang pangalan ng dokumento, pwede mo gamitin cash invoice for cash transactions. Pwedeng credit invoice o kaya charge invoice for credit transactions. This time, hindi na siya generic. Specific sales transaction ang paggagamitan mo ng invoice. Either way, it's your option. Okay? Pwede magtipid, sales invoice, lagyan mo lang siya ng box doon. Or kung gusto mo, specific, isang set ng cash invoice, isang set ng charge invoice. Bahala ka po. Ikaw ang pipili kung ano ang madali sa buhay mo. Okay, yan lang po yung ibig sabihin yan. And we will be revising and giving examples in the RMC. Okay, ito din po, medyo merong kailangang ayusin pagka-English. Considering that the ease of paying taxes no longer requires the issuance of official receipt, it operates established that the invoice as the primary and sole evidence of payment for goods and or services. So, yung payment dito, medyo konting i-restate lang po namin yan kasi evidence of sale and payment. Pwede po siya. Kanina, di ba, in-explain ko sa inyo yung definition ng invoice may actually include proof of payment as well. So, may konting word lang po idadagdag dyan. Thus, the invoice shall be sole documentation of payment for purposes of COA. So, aayusin din po natin yan. Yung word of payment lang naman yung aayusin dyan. And then, requirement for an official receipt as an additional document apart from the invoice for audit verification shall be removed, considering that the invoice is compliant with the invoicing requirement outlined in Section 6 of these regulations. Now, ito na po yung ulit, yung mga information that should be contained in the invoice. Kanina po pinag-usapan na to, just to reiterate, yun pong taxpayer registered name, as shown in the BIR Certificate of Registration. Na-explain ko na po ito sa inyo kanina. Now, at the option of the taxpayer, in addition to its BIR registered name, the taxpayer may choose to add its DTI registered business name or trade name. So, option nyo po kung idadagdag nyo po ang business name or trade name. Then, a statement that the seller is VAT or non-VAT registered followed by the TIN and branch code. So, that's the second information that is mandated. Next, the registered business address where the invoice shall be used. Then, number 4, the term invoice is printed doon sa document. Dito po lalabas kung sales invoice ba yan, cash invoice ba yan, charge invoice ba yan, credit invoice ba yan, miscellaneous invoice ba yan, service invoice ba siya. Bahala pa kayo kung ano man, basta meron siyang invoice sa dulo, such will have to be reflected in the document that you will issue for this purpose. Okay? Then number 5, the date of transaction. 6, a space provided for the registered name, registered business address, and TIN of the buyer. Again, wala na pong business style that will have to be reflected. If the sale of goods or services are directly between a business and consumer, B2C, and consumer po, who are end users of the products or service, the business address and TIN of the buyer are not required to be included. Okay? Pagka po end consumer ang ating mga customers or buyer. Then, ito na po yung common. No? These are the basic ones that we have. The serial number of the document that you will issue, the quantity, unit cost, description of the goods or nature of service, then the total amount of sale, which if VAT registered, the VAT amount will have to be included in that particular total amount. The VAT amount shown as a separate item, and then the VAT tax pay if the seller is engaged in mixed transaction, the breakdown of the sales as to VAT-able at 12%, zero-rated sales, and VAT-exempt sale. Then, if the VAT taxpayer opts to issue official receipt, issue separate invoices for each, na-explain ko na din po kanina ito. Kung gusto mo kanya-kanyang set ng invoice, isang set for VAT exempt, isang set for 12%, isang set for zero rated, that's the option of the taxpayer. Specifically, for those who are engaged in mixed transactions. Now, for supplementary invoices such as official receipt, delivery receipt, owner's slip, and others, okay, taxpayer or it is required that in addition to the information required that should be contained therein, the phrase or statement, this document is not valid for claim of input tax in bold letters must be prominently printed. Okay? This is a guide of the buyer so that they will not by any mistake magkamali, no, na mag-claim ng input tax from these supplementary invoices. Okay. Taxpayers' transactions are not subject to VAT or percentage tax shall issue a non-VAT invoice indicating the base of such invoice, the word exempt. Ito po, kung ang transaction ay kunyari agricultural food products, no? Walang percentage tax, wala ding VAT, kahit na magkano pa yan. So, dapat po mayroong word na exempt doon po sa invoice na ipiprint po ninyo. If taxpayer is not VAT registered and is subject to percentage tax, but sells goods and services Then, the non-VAT invoice shall indicate the breakdown of the sales subject to percentage tax and exempt sales na word. Okay? In certain cases, there are some taxpayers that pass on the percentage tax to the buyer. As such, the percentage tax that will be passed on to the buyer should likewise be indicated in the invoice. That is only if the seller opted to pass on the percentage tax. In some cases, kung wala naman po, no need not to indicate the amount of tax or percentage tax that may be due on that VAT exempt sales. Okay. Yung mga discount naman ito dong sa mga privilege, no? As a senior citizen, PWD, national athlete, and others. Now, for this group to be entitled to the discount and for BIR to allow the expenses that will have to be claimed by the seller, the following information should be provided. Number 1, the senior citizen ID number or any government-issued ID showing the name, the picture, date of birth, and nationality of the senior citizen. For PWD, it's ID. And then for Philippine National Sports Team ID, solo parent ID, lahat ng klase ng ID na po dito nakasama as long as this will be used for purposes of deductions or granting of discounts. And then of course, we have the amount of discount, whether at 5% or 20%, and the 12% VAT exemption if such is applicable. Now, alam naman po natin, pag prime commodity, binili sa mga groceries, no? This is, kung ang bumili po ay yung mga sinight natin, senior citizen and PWD, they are entitled to the 5% discount without VAT exemption. But in certain cases, like for example, medicine yan, exempt sa VAT, and meron pa rin pong 20% discount. In both cases, dapat po nakaka-specify yung discount and the exemption from VAT, yung pagtanggal ng VAT. Now, just to highlight, signature of senior citizen or PWD, pagka po sila ay bibili, okay, sa online, okay, sa online, nag-order sa online, tinanggal na po natin yung requirement na physically mayroong signature doon sa invoice. Kasi po, nagkaroon ng problema dito yung iba dahil babalik-balik pa daw yung invoice, sino magbabayad ng pamasahe ng invoice kung babalik sa seller. So, para magugulo, i-clarify po natin yan through a revenue regulation, tinanggal na din po natin yung requirement ng signature on the senior citizen PWD for purposes po ng claim for discount and exemptions. Okay. Now, another requirement sa bottom part of the invoice, sa mga manual invoices po ito, the details on the authority to print that was given. That includes the OCN, the date issued. Idadagdag lang po natin dyan ulit yung inclusive serial numbers that was approved, no, for this particular ATP. And then BIR permit number. For those using CRMPOS, nagdagdag po tayo on the top portion sa header, machine identification number, serial number of the CRMPOS that will be generated from this machine. Then we have the license and software number kung mga clone po ito. And then serial number of the machine itself pag proprietary po yung mga machines. Sa bottom part, we still have the permit to use as a requirement. For computerized accounting system, mayroong mga reprint na gagawin. There should be the word reprint that will have to be